Well, good afternoon and welcome back to Go ESG ASEAN 2021, organized by UN Global Compact Network Malaysia and Brunei. This is a call to action for companies to raise business SDG ambitions and mainstream sustainable financing. My name is Rahim Rahman, still here, and earlier today, three panel discussions took place discussing on various topics relating to sustainable financing. And we will continue down that road because day two is all about, will feature the UNGC ASEAN Sustainable Finance, focusing on various sustainable financing topics in the region. Well, hopefully you enjoyed your break, depending on which part of the world you are right now. If you are from where I am in Malaysia, hopefully you had a good lunch, you've enjoyed your lunch. And a lot of people are saying that it's always difficult to resume a forum or a conference after lunch because people are really filled up with lunch and perhaps feeling a bit sleepy. But do not underestimate the power and influence of our next set of panelists and moderator, who will be discussing on banks as ESG change agents, sustainable finance as sustainability performance pathways. The panelists are Mr. Yasuhiko Ushikubo, Senior Executive Officer and Global Head of Sustainability Solution of Mizuho Financial Group, Mr. Gabby Tomas, Senior Vice President of Rizal Commercial Banking Corporation, RCBC, Mr. Ahmad Solichin Lutfiyanto, Director of Compliance at PT Bank Rakyat Indonesia, Mr. Vikraman Kalia Purumal, Acting Group Head Strategy of Bank Pembangunan Malaysia, Berhad. The moderator for this session, she has been working on sustainable finance for the last 18 years. She moved to the UN Environment Programs, or UNEP, Asia Pacific Office in Bangkok, Thailand in 2018 to expand UNEP finance initiative activities in the region. She supports financial institutions in Asia Pacific to integrate sustainability within their business models and alignment with societal goals. She is also a qualified chartered accountant. Ladies and gentlemen, moderator for panel discussion number 7, Asia Pacific Coordination Manager at UNEPFI, Ms. Yuki Yasui. Over to you, Ms. Yuki.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks very much for joining this session. So, as Mr. Rahim has said earlier, I hope you had a good lunch and energized for the afternoon. I'm honored to be moderating a distinguished panel under the theme of banking as ESG change agents. And thank you to UN Global Compact Network Malaysia for inviting me. It's really great to see a whole day of a conference dedicated to sustainable financing. So before I turn to my wonderful panelists, let me just set up a bit of context to this session topic. So when it comes to climate change and other emerging sustainable finance and sustainability issues, we are now increasingly seeing these as global, systemic, and high risk. The banks are widely exposed to these sustainability risks since they often have clients across the whole economy. So a growing number of banks have therefore decided that the only way to reduce these risks is to proactively be part of the solution. Now, traditionally, banks are not known to be creating the demands. They are usually a good listener and responding to customer demand. Today, however, the banks around the world are adjusting their business models to proactively engage with clients on sustainability issues and to stimulate that demand for sustainable finance. So these banks are, as it were, future makers and ESG change agents, as the title of the session goes. And I'm very happy to be with some of these future maker banks for this session. Another so the overall objective of this session is to hear how leading banks on sustainability are adjusting their business strategy and developing new sustainable finance products in the ASEAN region. An add-on to this is also a discussion about greenwashing. Why? Because sustainable finance, by definition, needs to benefit society and the planet. If it just benefits the banks and the clients, that's not sustainable financing. So the banks have the obligation to manage a new idea called impact, the impact of their financing products and services to society and the planet. And to manage these impacts and to report on them is going to be a growing concern for the banks. So with this, let me introduce my lovely panelists. So first, I'd like to introduce Mr. Yasuhiko Ushikubo, who is a Senior Executive Officer and Global Head of Sustainability Solution at Mizuho Financial Group in Japan. Mr. Ushikubo is responsible for promoting sustainability-related businesses to support clients in their challenge towards sustainability. He's also the Senior Managing Executive Officer, responsible for supervising the overall research and consulting business of Mizuho Financial Group. Next, we also have Mr. Gabby Tomas, who is from RCBC, the Rizal Commercial Banking Corporation in the Philippines, and leads the bank's sustainable finance activities as its Chief Risk Officer and Risk Management Group Head. Prior to joining RCBC, Mr. Gabby has worked at Citibank and Accenture. Next up is Mr. Ahmad Solichin Lutfiyanto, who is the Director of Client Compliance at Bank Rakyat Indonesia, BRI. Mr. Ahmad has been a director of BRI since 2018 and has a rich portfolio of experience across various divisions within BRI, such as leading the BRI's transaction banking and retail banking divisions. Last but not least, we have Mr. Vikraman Purumal, who is the head of group strategy of BPMB, Bank Pembangunan, Malaysia, Berhad. Mr. Vikraman is responsible for implementing the bank's strategies and evaluating and developing new strategic opportunities. Prior to joining BPMB, Mr. Vikraman was at the Central Bank of Malaysia, Bank Negara, Malaysia. So, good afternoon, my dear panelists, and thank you very much for joining this panel. I hope we have a good discussion.
Good afternoon.
Let's start with some opening questions, and I will give the first question to Mr. Yasuhiko and Mr. Ahmad. So I'd like to ask the same questions to you first, starting with Mr. Yasuhiko. So please share with us your bank's mission, strategies, commitments, or targets in shaping the sustainable landscape in ASEAN in issuance of sustainable or green bonds and loans, improving the consistency, transparency, and accuracy of ESG reporting and disclosure, and building and enhancing capabilities of market participants, including your employees and clients. So over to you, Mr. Yasuhiko.
Thank you very much, kind introduction, Yasui-san. I'm very proud to be here. First of all, our mission in ASEAN is to contribute to the promotion of ASEAN industry by utilizing our capacity as a leading Japanese financial institution. It may be too obvious to say, but ASEAN is now the most fast-growing and thus important market globally. And needless to say, ASEAN is a a strategically important market for our company, Mizuho. We are one of the largest financial institutions globally, with 120 offices worldwide. And in ASEAN, we have 9 offices covering all the ASEAN countries, which is the biggest operation among Japanese banks in terms of coverage. Especially over the past 10 years, significance of ASEAN market for Japanese industry has grown rapidly. And we are now supporting around 10,000 Japanese operations in the region. As for ASEAN companies, we have relationship with more than 2,000 clients, most of which are the major players in each sector, such as power, chemical, automobile, real estate, and so on. When we see sustainability from industry perspective, the biggest challenge in ASEAN is on how to maintain or even accelerate the economic growth while achieving the decarbonization at the same time. And from Mizuho's perspective, naturally, our biggest agenda is to support such a challenge from the corporate finance point of view. According to the latest report by IEA, energy supply in ASEAN may almost double in next 30 years. And if there is no significant change in energy policies by 2050, oil, coal, and natural gas may still remain as the prime energy source. We have no doubt that every country in ASEAN is committed to decarbonization challenges. But the problem is, unlike mature economy like Japan, who is thinking about how to substitute the energy supply, ASEAN needs to think about how to increase the energy supply. Therefore, the concept of transition finance is especially important for us when we consider our contribution to ASEAN industry from financial institutions perspective. We understand that transition finance is to support the process of decarbonization by evaluating the long-term business plan, which accommodate pathway to net zero. Most of the firms in the hard-to-abate sectors can't turn green in very short term. Gradual but steady effort is needed to reduce CO2 emission and achieve the growth at the same time. And fostering new decarbonization technologies such as CCS or hydrogen fuel still need a huge investment in long run. So we believe that it is our important role to support such long-term effort from financial perspective. And climate transition finance is the important concept which supports such transitional activities. And when we think about the strategy, how we can promote the transition finance in this region, there are 2 keywords: connectivity and cooperation. One of our strengths is our extensive client base. As a leading Japanese financial institution, we cover more than 2/3 of the listed companies in Japan. And in ASEAN, we do have relationship with major players in each important sectors. Over the years, we have been supporting industries in ASEAN by utilizing our network and are willing to do the same in promoting sustainability and transition finance. So we would like to play an important role in connecting ASEAN and Japan industry, thereby facilitating the cooperation to tackle the issue together. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Yasuhiko. I think you've touched on a really important point, which is that in ASEAN especially, we need to increase the energy supply without relying on fossil fuel, and that transition finance is a really important concept that must be tackled. So you mentioned towards the end about connectivity and cooperation. Can you elaborate a little bit on these, if you have any examples or what you would anticipate, what kind of connectivity or cooperation you would like to promote for sustainability in the region? Thank you.
Thank you. ASEAN and Japan share the same problem in a way. when we think about sustainability or decarbonization. For instance, there are Japanese utility companies who are seeking for new partners in ASEAN to jointly develop new carbonization-related technologies. And we introduce them to our ASEAN clients. We are willing to accelerate such activity between ASEAN and Japan. Another thing we are looking forward to is the cooperation at government level. Early this year, ASEAN and Japan jointly announced Asia Energy Transition Initiative, which includes the development of ASEAN Energy Transition Roadmaps or ASEAN Transition Finance Guidance. We think this kind of action by government is important to facilitate better cooperation between ASEAN and Japan and drive sustainability in both countries' industry. And we have been assisting the government to push this initiative forward. So according to the energy policy announced by Japanese government a couple of months ago, by 2030, 20% of energy source will still consist of fire-powered plants, which include coal and natural gas. As you may know, Japan is a small, mountainous island with relatively mild climate consisting of 4 seasons. Unfortunately, we have a huge disadvantage in introducing renewable energy. Even though the fundamentals may be different between ASEAN and Japan, the fact that both have to tackle the issue of fossil fuel as an energy source shows that ASEAN and Japan are on the same boat. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That's a really interesting point of how you compared ASEAN and Japan's energy needs. Let me now, and I like the point about the supporting public action, and I think that that's a good segue to Mr. Ahmad of BRI to ask the same question, because BRI is a state-owned bank and has a lot of mandate to support the government policies. So, Mr. Ahmad, would you also share with us BRI's mission, strategy, commitments, or targets in shaping the sustainable landscape in ASEAN, please? Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you for the question, Ms. Yuki. So first of all, I would like to share a bit about Bank Rakyat Indonesia, or BRI. We were founded almost 126 years ago, and we are the oldest bank in Indonesia. But now we still growing to be the largest bank in Indonesia in terms of asset and one of the largest microfinance institution in the world. In terms of market caps, we are the 3rd biggest bank in ASEAN and the 49th biggest bank in the world. And we believe that part of our total market cap is contributed by ESG investors who trust that we could give sustainable shareholder value. And now we've been focusing on serving micro and small entrepreneurs with the largest customer base, around 13 million micro and small borrowers, and around more than 100 million saving customer. However, we are really aware that our contribution to the economic and social development should be balanced with the effort to protect environment, including reducing the impact of climate change, as mentioned by Ms. Yuki, and also this issue discussed in the recent COP26 in Glasgow. That's related to the question. In 2019, we already issued sustainable bond as part of our sustainable funding strategy. The bond issuance value was $500 million, and we used the proceed 75% for social project and the rest 25% of the proceed for green projects. The bond was actually oversubscribed 8.4 times, and we also paid negative new issue around 2 bips inside fair value level, so which reflect our investor really confidence in the positive social and environmental impacts that can be delivered by BRI sustainability bond. And this is very related with what your concern, Ms. Yuki, that the bank should, we are actually one of the best in listen the voice of the customer. And And the bond at least contributed to the achievement of the 3 SDG goals, which are the decent work and economic growth, reduce inequality, and also sustainable city and communities. We are also aware the importance of the consistency, transparency, and accuracy of ESG reporting and disclosure as well. That's why we continuously keep improving our ESG reporting and disclosure through our sustainability reports by aligning the report with the international reporting standards like GRI and SASB. And we also perform an assurance process to assure the quality and the accuracy of data and information disclosed on our sustainability report has satisfied the minimum reporting standards. So to validate our effort in improving our ESG reporting and disclosure, we've been active in participating in sustainability report awarding events such as ASRAT. This year, we finally earned its first platinum rank, the highest award after several consecutive gold rank in the past year. So even though we have reached the highest award in ASRAT, we believe that there are still a lot of room for improvement for us to meet stakeholder expectation on our ESG reporting. And the last thing, we are aware also that we will not be successful in implementing ESG strategy without involving our stakeholders, especially as you mentioned, employees and customers. That's why we also try to attract our employee and customer to participate in ESG program. For the employee, as part of our ESG implementation in the human capital aspect, we assure that all our employees get equal right, including in the recruiting, training, salary, and also promotion process. Our effort in promoting equal right and opportunity among employees also shown in the composition of women employees in management, from manager to executive vice president, which was at 30% of total employee in the management level are women. And it's also important to increase employee awareness on ESG and sustainable finance practices. We've been carrying out some capacity building program, including e-learning on sustainable finance for employees and sustainable finance award to promote ESG implementation across the bank. In terms of environmentally and banking operation, we've been aggressively innovating and developing digital initiatives such as BRISport, which is a digital underwriting system, BRIStar, digital office system, and also BRISmart, which is digital e-learning. So that's all we do to support our initiative strategy in ESG. On the customer side, we have identified that around 65% of our loan portfolio are disbursed to sustainable business activity, which include green sector and also micro and SME. So to promote green financing, we require our CPO borrowers to have ISPO or RSPO certification. We also provided educational programs through training and capacity buildings for borrowers to increase their awareness on ESG and sustainable finance. That's from the asset side. From the liability side, we've been actively enhancing our saving products and process to support more than 100 million our saving customer to do environmentally friendly banking transaction by using digital banking. So we also has put risk management into our digital initiative, among others by implementing data privacy and cybersecurity management as well. Thank you, Ms. Yuki.
Thank you, Ms. Ahmed, and thank you for providing a really good overview of your institutional setup on sustainable finance. So let's now focus on more of the financing itself, and I'm going to ask Mr. Gabby, please can you share RCBC's experience in green bonds and sustainable bonds? What are the merits that you see of these sustainable finance products to help finance, especially large capital projects in developing countries? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yuki. I'm very happy to be sharing, this webinar with an esteemed panel of gentlemen from the ASEAN region. In answering the question, maybe I should elaborate in three ways the positive impact of green and sustainable bonds, not only as instruments, but also the process of underwriting themselves. As banks or issuers, we are catalysts of these projects and we mobilize these funds where they're supposed to go. But that requires a certain process or discipline, if you will. In RCBC's experience, we followed the International Capital Market Association Green and Sustainable Bond Principles. And that required us to undertake certain processes. Four components to these principles: use of proceeds, make sure that these are deployed to projects with clear environmental benefits. Also, a process for determining if the projects indeed can deliver those environmental benefits. We manage the proceeds by keeping track of where they are invested, how we place unused or unallocated funds. And last but not least, and this goes back to your point about greenwashing, reporting, which ensures that this entire process system from end to end is transparent and can be demonstrated to issuers or investors whenever they want to look at these. From the consumer point or customer point of view, um, engaging with a bank who is active in the ESG space actually opens their horizons in terms of ESG. They move from being merely compliant to local regulations and ordinances, and they realize the value and they find out how they can be more engaged in the process. The sooner our clients understand the urgency and inevitability of ESG, the sooner they can find out that these are actually opportunities they can capitalize on. In some of the talks I have attended, I always tell the SMEs there is an opportunity, there is actually a need for technological advancement and breakthrough. So, as a company, as an entrepreneur, you would like to be at the forefront of that innovation. You want to be the next big thing. So that's the opportunity for companies and corporates and clients. In terms of the industry, we did a write-up on the impact of the industry, and I'll just read an excerpt from that write-up we did. For our peer banks, our issuance of green and sustainability bonds has raised awareness and has brought about inspiration for them to follow suit in supporting projects, both large and small, towards sustainability. Based on data from the Central Bank of the Philippines as of end of June this year, around $4.28 billion of green, social, and sustainable bonds were issued by Philippine companies. This accounts for 35% of the 12 billion US dollar ASEAN labeled green, social, and sustainable bonds in the region. The proceeds from these issuances have been invested in projects with clear environmental and social benefits, such as renewable energy, energy efficiency, green buildings, clean transport, pollution prevention and control, sustainable water management, education, and the like. So the short answer really is that green and sustainable bonds ultimately foster a common understanding between issuers, customers, and the industry that answers not only that the funds are deployed properly, but also that entrepreneurs and companies engage and initiate and start these big capital projects that have clear environmental benefits, which we all urgently need. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gabby. I really like the way you've explained your green bonds as a fruit of your customer engagement, and that you are now sharing a common understanding on sustainability. That's really encouraging and aspirational. So maybe on this one, I mean, not so long ago, only a few years ago, I would say that sustainability for banks and for corporates in general was still very much a philanthropical activity, but as quickly, the landscape is quickly evolving and has already evolved, and we are seeing the pace of change really becoming quicker and quicker. So would you say that in the Philippines, your customers are at what level do you think they are on that kind of change in mindset that this sustainability is a real business opportunity and also something that is required for their future growth?
That's a very good question. And although we did issue our bonds, green and sustainable bonds, in 2019, we actually have been active in the ESG space beginning 2011 when we established an environmental and social management system. And I can tell you that in 2011, the conversation was very different. In fact, it was an uphill climb for us to convince, especially small and medium enterprises, to comply with certain principles. The conversation will always be, look, the local regulators are not asking these things from me. Why are you bringing these things up? But the heartening thing about it is that at this point in time, not only are the large corporates embarking on their own sustainability journeys, the small, micro, medium enterprises are actually asking us about how we do our process, how we can help them. What does it mean for them? Because another offshoot of these bond issuances is that for a bank who is active in the space, you get to share your experience. And it's gone beyond advertising. It's more advocacy now. And because they see that, they come to you. They ask you, "What's all this sustainable and green bonds you're doing, and how does it impact my company? Is there any benefit for me?" And that starts a very, very good conversation and a very good partnership.
Thank you very much for sharing that. That's very interesting. Let me now turn to Mr. Vikraman. We've touched upon this several times through our speakers already, but I want to ask you to cover more about the impact management or the impact that you are creating at BPMB through your sustainable financing. So how is your financing affecting society and planet? If you could answer about how they are affecting the SDG for Malaysia, and also a little bit about the BPMB Green Sukuk. What is it trying to achieve, and how have you been following the impact? Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question, Yuki. Specifically, it's actually the BPMB Sustainability Sukuk. So the proceeds have a wider ambit than green, thankfully. That gives us a certain degree of flexibility, really. Now, Yuki, in 2019, BPMB embarked on its 3-year strategic transformation plan. And the intention here was to be Malaysia's leading developmental partner, anchoring on a commitment to accelerate economic and social development. Now, this is a narrative that will reoccur from time to time because there are certain trade-offs when you think about economic and social development, at least at present and at least for developing nations. So in delivering on this strategic transformation plan, BPMB consciously embedded the SDGs as a core element of our approach. As such, we're quite proud to say that the SDGs are a consideration in all aspects of our business. So to use an analogy, really, you could say the SDGs are part of our manufacturing process. So I'll elaborate a little bit about this manufacturing process. In October this year, BPMB issued 450 million ringgit of sustainable sukuk. Now, this was taken up via private placement. There were investors who were keen on large chunks of this, so we managed to, issue it to these private investors. But the intention really behind this sustainable sukuk was twofold. Primarily, it was to provide an avenue for responsible investments, giving the investor community, more access to different credits with sustainable sukuk. Secondly, it is to promote financing for sustainable, resilient, and inclusive recovery and growth via the capital markets. I think it is not an alien concept to any one of us here today that growth notwithstanding, the recovery narrative is something that will be prevalent for at least 2 to 3 years to come, post-COVID recovery specifically. So this funding, if you would think about it, is our raw material, right? And when you think about the raw material, the next step is the process of what you do with that raw material. And in October also, we rolled out our impact assessment framework. This framework is called Measuring Impact on National Development. And since it's a mouthful, we've abbreviated it to MIND. We actually jointly develop MIND with certain government ministries, Malaysian government ministries, as well as the World Bank Group. Now you can think of MIND as the manufacturing process, where the funds that I mentioned earlier, or the raw materials, are converted into financing assets. So what do I mean by this? Well, the MIND tool allows us to assess, select, and monitor financing opportunities, which in turn will maximize impact towards fulfilling the SDGs. So if I were to recap, on the raw material side or the funding side, we've got the sustainability sukuk that allows investors an opportunity to invest in green financing or sustainable financing, as well as stimulates and promotes the conversation around sustainable financing. The MIND framework, which is the core of the manufacturing process, where we then assess financing opportunities, monitor these financing opportunities, and before monitoring them even, select and prioritize the financing opportunities. So that takes me then to the third and final part of the process, really, the products. Now, I mentioned the sustainability sukuk more than once, our flagship sustainability-centric liability product, right? But for our asset products, what we have, products notwithstanding, really are schemes. And these schemes drive advancement of the SDG goals. The first and flagship would be the Sustainable Development Financing Scheme. That is 2 billion ringgit to support the government's efforts in implementing the 17 SDGs. Of this 2 billion ringgit, 800 million ringgit has already been utilized. Secondly, we have the National Development Scheme. The National Development Scheme consists of 1.4 billion ringgit in supporting the 12th Malaysia Plan, basically targeted from 2021 to 2025. And the idea here is to support the implementation of this plan while enabling Malaysia to achieve economic empowerment, environmental sustainability, and social re-engineering. Broad categories for sure, but all of which are goals that are very much aligned with the aforementioned SDGs. Thirdly, and this is a rather small one, we have the Public Transport Scheme. Public Transport Scheme is 100 million ringgit bent on increasing the utilization of public transport, again, reducing our carbon footprint. So Yuki, to go back to your question of how I would rate BPMB sustainable finance products, what our impact has been on the SDGs, I'd like to think we've done well so far, but there's plenty of room for all of us to do more together. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's really, I really like the way you explain your sustainable finance activities in a form of manufacturing process. That's really unique and very easy to understand as well. Okay, so on this one, I mean, I think you rightly pointed out about the importance of COVID recovery and a fair, just transition, I think is, something that you touched upon as well. How do you see this, like, one of the things that UNEP is concerned about is that we are just going to go for a ordinary recovery and that we need to make sure that it is a green and fair recovery. And I think what you are doing, your objectives on your sustainability sukuk is exactly that. How do you see that balance between social issues and greenness of that? Are you trying to go for both at the same time, or is there a priority in that one?
Yuki, at the risk of using a cliche, I think that the Mandarin character for risk is the same as for opportunity. And what we have right now is a situation where you've had a sort of cleaning out of a lot of industries, a rebasing, if you will. So it's really an opportunity to start afresh. So then the challenge is, how are you going to start afresh? Are you going to innovate greener solutions to fill in that space vacated by industries, businesses that sort of were exited, unfortunately, but exited by the COVID-19 pandemic? So then the next question is, look, you've got this rebased environment. A lot of players have left. There's room to enter. The next question is, how do you shape the players in this newly rebased field? Well, if you give them the right support, if you give them green-centric incentives, SDG-centric incentives, then the guys who come back and build into this space will be players that have already been aligned with the SDGs. So in fact, short answer to your question, now is the time to actually over-index on supporting SDG-related new initiatives to fill in the vacuum that the COVID-19 pandemic has created.
So that means that's a lot of opportunity for entrepreneurs who understand that concept and share your business model then.
That's right.
Okay, thank you very much. So let's now move on to discussions and questions and answers. Maybe let me ask first a few questions from my side, and if participants, if you have any questions to the panelists, please do post them, and we will also be looking at that as well. So let me just pose an opening question. It's something that I've already asked to I think this is the one that I asked to Mr. Gabby. I thought that was really interesting response that Mr. Gabby made. So let me ask the same question to, say, Mizuho, Mr. Yasuhiko. What are the merits of green or sustainable bond to help finance large capital projects in developing countries? I know Mizuho has a lot of project financing, and is a leader on the Equator Principles as well. So I want to ask your ideas on this question. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That's a very good question. In Japan, transition finance is primarily focused on supporting transitional activity in heavy industries such as power, chemical, or steel. We believe the same could apply to ASEAN industry. Transition in energy sector is especially very important in ASEAN, and to achieve that, large and long-term financing is required. So, therefore, going forward, we believe that transition finance will be playing an important role in energy transition. The key driver for promoting such transition finance is to come up with authorized and credible energy transition roadmap. As I said before, transition finance basically evaluated consistency with net zero pathway. So in promoting transition finance, agreement on ASEAN version of transition roadmap is inevitable. So we understand that such a roadmap is in discussion in ASEAN, and the Japanese government is also supporting that process. We hope that such joint effort will lead to a development of roadmap that is compelling to all the stakeholders, including finance institutions. And Mizuho, my company, is also willing to support such a process. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, so roadmaps and energy transition is, I think, really important. And I think this kind of comes quite well with a question that I see on the chat, which is about data, which is more or less around the same thing as well. So you have a roadmap, and then you need to know where the baseline is and what is the trajectory that your client is trying to follow, or your country's industry is trying to follow. So the question here was, reliable data is important to assess the bank's exposure to climate risks, or see if the goals are aligned with the SDGs. However, many firms don't provide such information. How can banks actively work to address these data gaps and ensure consistent disclosure standards among companies? So I guess your client's data is your data, and you rely on them to provide accurate and consistent information. Do you have anyone from the panel would like to make a comment around how you engage with your clients on data and information and disclosure?
Yeah, I'd like to speak to this point, Yuki.
Thank you, Mr. Gabby.
Okay, part of the process we put in place in 2011 is we actually look at our portfolio and identify clients who are, we call them environmental risk category. And part of our commitment is that if they are an ERC high risk, then we need to do a due diligence, an environmental and social due diligence. Pre-pandemic, this would entail site visits from our environmental and social risk officers, conversations with their CFO or their health officers on what types of standards they follow in terms of HR, occupational safety, even emissions, even waste disposal. Now that the challenge of COVID has led us to continue this activity, albeit it's a desktop activity, but we do work a lot with documents and certifications they submit to us with the local government. Now that's one. The other part of the question talks about reliability of the data we have. And part of the discipline is, number one, our entire sustainability program is actually subject to independent audit. That is required, and we do that with an independent auditor, number one. Number two, we publish what we call an impact report annually. And this is a video that talks about the program, what the impact has been, what SDGs are being addressed by our program. And that is a video that's available on our website. So it's publicly available. And the emphasis here is transparency all around. So I think that answers the question.
Yeah, thank you. And I think this is really a moving target right now, that everything is, that we have a lot of now international forums and platforms that help both companies and financial institutions to measure impact and risk. So I think the question kind of also hinted at TCFD reporting, the forward-looking scientific-based analysis on climate risk for both banks and for corporations. And also just to say that TNFD, the Task Force on Nature-related Financial Disclosure, is also has started its work and will develop its framework over the next few years, and to launch it towards the end of 2023. So we are going to see a lot of international standards that will help us, but at the same time, the banks will need to work on the capacity building of that, as well, as they are not easy frameworks to deal with. So maybe if speakers, if you have any questions that you think you would like to answer, please have a look in the chat box and let me know. From my side, maybe I want to ask a little bit about some questions that I've prepared in advance, which is, let me see if Bank Rakyat, Mr. Ahmad, whether you can respond to this one. So adopting ESG principles remains a challenge for banks in developing countries, which are highly dependent on fossil fuel and palm oil for their economy. How can banks work with their borrowers, especially micro and small medium enterprises, to ensure a transition towards a sustainable future? I think you touched a little bit upon that in your first answer, but if you can maybe elaborate a little bit around this topic. Thank you.
Thank you, Yuki. It's a very interesting question, and also it's really relevant to my country. Yes, we are really aware that adopting ESG principle is very challenging in developing countries like Indonesia. I don't know with other countries, Malaysia, Philippines. I don't know they have the same issue or not. But for us, this is a really relevant issue. However, we still optimistic that we will be able to adopt the ESG principles, of course, gradually, as we believe that ESG is we think ESG is a journey, not a destination. So a process from small steps to finally give a significant positive impact. In terms of our dependency on fossil fuels, particularly on coals. Indonesian government has set target to the transition to renewable energy from currently around 20% to around 20% in 2025. So this in line with our exposure to coal industry has been decreasing from around 2.5%. Now it's only around 1.6%. The same trend also applies to our exposure to oil and gas industry. That now is only around 1.6%. So in terms of palm oil, we have implemented credit risk management as well, specifically for CPO borrowers in the corporate segment. We require the borrowers to have a ISPO or ISPO. So also we forbid borrowers to open new palm oil plantation from any green fields. For the MSME segment, as you mentioned, we've been working together with our borrowers to accelerate the sustainable finance implementation through trainings and capacity buildings to increase their awareness on environmental protection when doing business. Simultaneously, we are also partnering with UNEP to create an innovative program which will also involve our borrowers and encourage them to transition toward sustainability. This program is called SDGs Link Loan in the form of micro-lending product that aims to encourage and accelerate green economy in micro segment. So we do believe through this program, our borrower will provide it with capacity buildings and technical assistance and and they will also be required to achieve certain KPIs that are related to SDGs, green business practices, or other sustainability-related KPIs. And at the end, this program, we hope the borrower succeeds in achieving KPIs that have been set. So the borrowers will be rewarded with some incentive, for example, like interest rate discount. Then going forward, we will keep engaging with our borrowers either through trainings and knowledge sharing or also active engagement by involving them in certain programs. Thank you, Ms. Yuki.
Thank you very much. I'm really happy you brought up the UNEP project because I'm involved in it myself. So,
really excited to work with UNEP.
Yes, thank you very much. Maybe Mr. Vikraman, maybe let me turn to BPMB's work. We haven't covered so much on large capital projects. Would you have anything there around green financing or sustainable financing?
Well, a couple of points really. We did about 470 million ringgit in green financing this year, 2021. Given a total asset base of just under 25 billion ringgit, that's a decent size for us. And it's hard coded into our performance management framework or our KPIs that we have to do a certain amount of SDG or green financing per annum. So yeah, that's the short answer. But I think there's a little bit more stuff I want to add color around. I hope you don't mind. A couple of things I want to address really since I've been given the chance. One is development banks are the best poised for transition finance. We did a large transition finance piece of work earlier this year where we moved, we're basically trying to convert coal into gas, right? So although it's still fossil fuels, it's an improvement in terms of carbon emissions. So that's another area that we actively participate in. So to answer your question with respect to large-scale capital projects, definitely infrastructure is our lifeblood. Transition finance is something we're very keen and excited on. Green financing is hard-coded into our annual mandates. To segue into an unrelated topic, though, I saw a question here that's Malaysia-specific, and I can't resist trying my hand at it. Are there plans for FIs in Malaysia to prepare common ESG practice surveys and in an integrated manner? I made a mention of the MIND framework earlier, and at the onset of engagement with the client, you give them questions to answer. That's really how the MIND framework is informed. And we would be keen to explore opportunities to collaborate on this framework. I mean, subject to whatever restrictions that come with it, and whether it's a share of ideas or a share of the framework itself, we're open to discussions. But what we're keen on is definitely, I understand this clients, this corporate borrowers' desire to have some form of standardization. I can only put myself in the shoes of a corporate borrower, 30 different banks or 15 different banks, all of whom have different metrics, organized differently, some free form, some, plug and play binary or yes, no answers. It's a lot. And so, yeah, we would definitely be keen to have conversations, and offline, anyone can reach out to myself, and I will probably position them towards the right people, since this was a Malaysia specific question. Thank you.
Thank you so much for answering that, Mr. Vikraman. So on having a common survey, I mean, I guess a lot of I saw a news that this week that IOSCO, the International Community of Stock Exchange Commissioners, have agreed to set guidelines on, a common guideline on what they should be asking the listed companies to report on sustainability issues. And I think that's also a very good development from the kind of the sustainability reporting angle. But I think your mind framework that you introduced is really interesting as well. And it'd be good to kind of have several of these kind of standardizations moving along in the near future. So thank you very much. I think we have to close in 3 minutes. So let me ask each of you to say maybe just 30 seconds of message to the participants. What would you say to your clients or your stakeholders? Thank you. I'll start from Mr. Yasuhiko, please.
Yeah, thank you. I feel that this year will be a turning point of global industry in the history, where the first phase of fundamental change in industry structure has materialized due to global effort toward decarbonization. As a financial institution, we are committed to play a critical role to achieve sustainable growth and sustainable environment all together in this ASEAN region. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Yasuhiko. And Mr. Gabby, please.
Thank you, Yuki. My message would be coming out of taking a jab at COP26. One of the things that stuck in my mind in one of those talks was that in 2020, we closed the world because of COVID. Everything shut down. And in 2020, we reduced carbon emissions by 6.3%. To give you a magnitude, we have to be 6.3% for the next 10 years if we're going to make the 1.5 degree objective. So what am I trying to say? It's a huge job. It's an immense task. And we can't do it alone. We have to do it together with the banks, with our peer banks, with our customers, with our governments. This has to be a collective effort. And only together can we succeed. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And Mr. Ahmad?
Yeah, thank you, Yuki. I think I agree with the Gabby that sustainability is a goal that can be achieved if all stakeholders, without exception, including the bank, government, customer, supplier, investor, are willing to get actively involved and work together. So for us, BRI, ESG is not a destination, but more a journey. So my message is enjoy the journey, enjoy the experience, do it with patience, and make it happen for our next generation. Thank you.
That's lovely. And Mr. Vikraman?
I'd just like to say, as financial institutions, none of us can scale fast enough or large enough to solve the problem individually. Now, it isn't a zero-sum game. We're all sort of pointing towards the same direction with the same goal. I think collaborations are inevitable. And all I can do is offer ourselves as a development bank to kickstart or to drive that, because we obviously have different objectives, nation building, etc. So reaching out to anyone who's keen to partner with us, both on a regional and a national level, And stemming from that, hopefully we can get this, we can put this problem away. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I guess the common narrative here is cooperation. We travel together to achieve nearly the impossible, but the scientists say it is possible if we are determined. And I hope that the participants, you have received some good ideas and inspiration from our panelists. And I thank all the panelists for this wonderful discussion. Thank you very much for joining this session.
Thank you, Yuki, for moderating.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yuki.
Over back to the MC, Mr. Rahman.